Hello, and welcome to the Jim Ruff Show. Today, my special guest is John Buck, who's from the East Coast, and John is an expert in the field of sociocracy and what is now called dynamic governance. And so I'm very anxious for us to have this wonderful conversation. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jim.
Good. And I should also say John is also an experienced manager, and he has written a book, which we don't have to show you, but it's called We the People, Consenting to a Deeper Democracy. And so, John, I wanted to say also that this field of sociocracy has been around for many decades, I guess.
It's been under development in Holland since at least you could say the 1940s, but really intensive development since the 70s.
70s, okay. And I've heard about it, and so I had the pleasure this weekend of being in your two-day workshop and learning a little bit about it. So, but I think for the audience's sake, maybe you could just kind of explain, what is this field, sociocracy? What is this stuff?
Yeah. Sociocracy means rule by the socios. The socios is the people who have a social relationship with each other. The demos, as in the root of democracy, means ruled by the mass of people who don't really particularly have a social relationship with each other. And that means that the values that we have in democracy are the same, but the structure for bringing about equality and a voice for everybody, that kind of thing, is a little bit different. And it lets us bring those values to our organizations. Right now, if you go work for a regular company, you're going to have a very hierarchical structure. It's not really run democratically. Right. And we haven't known until now how to make the way we run our businesses take advantage of all the benefits there are from democracy. And sociocracy allows you to really reach those while still keeping the benefits of all the conventional business structures that we have. Those don't get thrown out. You just sort of add something to it.
Okay, so you're adding something to a conventional business structure,
right.
Generally. Not so much in the public sphere, but in the general...
No, in the public sphere too.
Okay, good. We'll pursue that. Good. So you're adding something that generates a much more democratic way of thinking
right.
and process and feeling and culture in the organization.
Right, right.
And that's something that you add. Could you say something about it?
Yeah, you overlay something called a circle structure on it, and that lets you bring in measurement and a complete process where people can get together and figure out what's our policy, who do we want to have be our boss even, so that when people are operating day by day in the usual business structure, they've already consented to, this is how we want to operate together. We're doing this all together. We're a real family. And the circle structure, in a funny way, kind of rewires power so that you actually have a stronger organization.
Okay, and so what's the key element of that? So what we're going to do is bring something into this organization, and all of us have consented to be in the organization somehow, right?
Yeah, well, we got employed.
We got employed, okay.
Yeah.
So then, now you're bringing a different kind of consent to process
right.
to the organization that rewires that original consent in a way,
yeah.
so that we have a much more democratic environment. Can you
right.
say more about that?
If you're kind of like taking the eagle's eye view of the company, it probably pretty much looks the same day to day, but as you go in maybe closer, you'd see that people are having special kind of meetings, maybe once a month, sometimes more frequently, and they're acting in those meetings differently than they do in like a regular staff meeting. And they're following a different process.
Yes.
And in those meetings, they're making policy decisions together of all sorts. And then you'll notice that, okay, it's back day to day, but you might notice a few differences in the work being done. You might notice people being a little bit more conscious about measuring what they're doing so they can get that data back and all look at it together. And that's the kind of difference you feel. It's just a little change in some ways and a big change in other ways.
Okay. So you're taking this normal hierarchical structure that is a consent process in a way, and you're adding to it a different kind of, a new meeting structure. and you call it the circle structure.
Circle structure.
And in this new meeting structure, something different happens. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Let me just say in general, this meeting structure replaces the whole basis of decision making that you had before. Before, it was really kind of power over from, if you have an owner, then the owner can do whatever the owner wants.
Yes.
And the owner in this case says, you know, I'm not getting the kind of performance I want out of that. I want to have everybody share in the ownership in a real way. So I want to change the basic decision-making structure so that we all own ourselves. I'm not owning everybody that works for me in a kind of a literal way. So you're making decisions about policy, so you don't make them that often, but you're making it by something called consent. And that's not asking for agreement. You're not asking, if I'm the owner or the leader, I'm not asking people to agree with me, but I am wanting to know, can they live with the policy? Can they tolerate it? And if they can't, I need to know that, and I have to pay attention to that. So that's what kind of consent decision making is about.
Interesting. So there's you're changing the way the process of thinking in the organization happens, and you're saying that it really comes from the leader saying, oh, okay, I'm not, I want to have a more egalitarian structure in this world. And you're setting in motion an added meeting, and in this added meeting is a consent process that gets established.
And let me try to give a specific example, because I can imagine the audience is going, what's happening here? The laboratory organization in Holland that was where this was developed, it's a real business. They do heavy electrical work. Was set up this way, and maybe 8 or 9 years into it, they had proof that they really had managed to distribute the leadership, the real leadership, to everybody. And what happened was that a large section of the company was earning money putting wiring into ships. This is heavy wiring, all kinds of special cabinets and stuff. And suddenly the Dutch shipping industry was forced out of business from the Japanese competition. And that meant that a number of people in this Endenburg Electrotechnique company were out of a job. And so the board of directors was saying, okay, well, we have to order a layoff here of these people. And it turned out that one of the machinists in the company, they made special electrical cabinets. He wasn't part of the shipping department, but he was just a regular machinist. Got to thinking, he said, you know, we have a reserve fund for emergencies, and this feels like an emergency to me. I think we should take all those guys that were working on the ships, put coats and ties on them, give them some marketing training, and send them out to get more business. They'd be really good because they know the technical stuff. And so he said to his circle, the people that he worked with, this is my idea. And they said, great, we like that idea. Let's have you go up to the next higher level of management as our representative, because you have both the managers as well as people that are on the floor being part of these circles. And the general circle said, well, that's a good idea. There's a few more things we want to add. Why don't you be our representative, our special representative to the board of directors for this issue? So he carried it up there, and there was a lot of back and forth on it. But eventually, they decided to try out his idea. And sure enough, it worked. They got in a whole bunch of more business, and they were just a stronger company because they were more diversified. But it was the machinist who thought of it, and the mechanism, this circle structure, was able to rocket him to the top leadership position because he had an idea. And that's the power of this structure. It really unleashes a lot of creativity from everybody, not just the top leaders.
Yeah. Well, let me explain to the audience, too, how my reaction was. I've been looking at this sociocracy for many years and getting blocked, really, by the feeling of complexity and really hyper-rationality is the way it felt to me. And what I found in the workshop is that it's not it's a seemingly rational process, but in my judgment, what it does is it really, and the idea at the core is to go around, have a round where each person gets a moment to speak.
It's part of the circle meeting format.
Part of the circle meeting format. And to see if each person has a chance to see if they have a paramount objective.
Objection.
Objection.
Yeah.
Objection to what's happening. Thank you. Keep me honest. And what that means is that all of a sudden there's a moment and people are starting to look within and they're starting to speak from the heart.
Yeah.
So here we have this highly rational
my gut also.
process, or the gut, whatever. Highly rational seeming process, and I think of it as obfuscating what's really going on in a way. A lot of the language that I read in the past about this, but what happens is that people speak from the heart, and then each person, as it goes around, picks up on and also speaks from the heart and modifies what's being said.
Yeah.
And so eventually what happens is there's this sense of the group that's in a way kind of true consensus.
Yeah, right. Formal consensus that, like Butler talks about, it's alignment, or whatever term you want to use, but we're kind of together as a family type feeling.
Yeah. So, and that is the core. To me, that's the engine of this thing, is the quality of heartfelt communication and creativity around that gets evoked seemingly by this consent process, like we're consenting. But to me, it's much, much bigger than consent. I mean, that's the language that gets attached to it. And that, to me, is in fact, I feel that that people may be misinterpreting what's happening. Because in my language, what this is this is a heart process that has all this magical stuff happening, and then the overlay on it is always kind of a head language, sort of organizational language kind of thing, you know.
Well, I was aware of your work for a long time, so I was delighted when you decided to come to the workshop, and it was so enriching for me to get your observations like that, and I'm just, I'm taking that all in. I really appreciate it.
Well, so let's jump to the world of democracy, because
Okay.
that's a real passion of mine.
Right. Okay.
How does this, and you've titled your book, We the People,
Yeah.
which sounds like the world of democracy, going to consenting to a deeper democracy. How does this translate to democracy?
It's really hard to pin down what we mean by democracy. If we equate democracy with majority vote, then I think it's too limiting. I think what we really mean in our hearts by democracy is the ideals that started out in Athens, that we're all equal people, we all have a voice, we're all respected, nobody is better by birth or by wealth or whatever, that we're all together in governing ourselves. And if that's what we mean by democracy, then I'm a Democrat, or I'm in favor of it, and I'm doing the work I do out of a feeling of patriotism, trying to support that.
Mm-hmm. So how do I use this process to create a We the People in the United States, for instance?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is being built from the bottom up. It was developed in a specific company, and I've got clients and other people have, they're working with this, have clients that in all kinds of organizations. But it's been at the organizational level, and we're only just now asking the question, well, what if we tried this out in a town? What if there were a way to really create the town as a whole family? I mean, the government as we have it right now is sort of like they're over there doing their infrastructure thing, but we have our parties or we have our theater or whatever, and we're not really all cohesively together. What happens if we had a way that would, let us all kind of sing together? And we're just starting to explore that. There's some work that'll be going on starting this summer with a town up in Quebec in Canada, and there's been some other attempts in Holland that have been stalled for one reason or another, and I'd love to get something going in the U.S. where we're starting to experiment with that. Running the whole country seems a long ways off. I mean, we've been thinking a little bit about it, but just be practical and build it from the bottom up is what
So, okay, so I mean, I've been to the 2-day workshop, and it's really hard for me to see how it would work for a town.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, I have a strategy that I think could create a We the People for the town. So I'm really, really interested in this.
Right.
How would you How would you make this happen?
And the audience might like to know, we just made an appointment in a few weeks to get back together and talk more about this. It was frustrating to only have 2 days on it, because I think there's some definite synergy that can be brought to it. I had the feeling you were thinking, there's some interesting things here, and I'm really wanting to know more about your work. So it is a question. I don't have a town to point to yet. We're kind of like, the reason we've held back actually is the question of why is a town there? What is it that a town really is doing? What's the aim of a town? And that's a difficult question to ask.
Okay, so now here's some insights I've had since your seminar, because you may remember in the last day I kept pestering
me. Yes, you were.
about why this aim. Why are you getting so focused on the aim?
Mm-hmm.
And I had an insight about it, and I decided that what's really happening is that in the process that you use, this consent process, which I plan to use in some situations in the future, in that consent process, you're looking for the paramount objective.
Objection.
Did it again.
2 times.
And what that really implies, so I'm looking at what's wrong with something.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it doesn't, it turns around.
Not so much what's wrong with it is, can I tolerate it?
Can I tolerate it? Okay.
Yeah.
But I know that it turns around because people get in the spirit of finding it. But it's really what's needed in order to begin that process is this assumed sense of what we're really doing.
Yeah, you have to have it, for the process to work, you have to have a common aim.
Common aim.
Yeah.
So, because in the process that I use, which is dynamic facilitation, we're asking people, we're going around too in a different way, but we're asking people what is really concerning me from the heart, and we're also asking, what do I really want? And melding the two. So we don't need the aim.
Yeah, okay.
And so that's why I was struggling.
Yeah.
It's like, what is this aim thing?
I can see your process being very effective if you're trying to reconcile different viewpoints among people who may or may not have something in common. I might call that multi-party facilitation. I might call it mediation. And so you're multiple people who just happen to be next to each other or running into each other. Your process is very effective on that, and it doesn't need a common aim.
Which is kind of like what happens in a democracy.
Right.
In other words, in a town, you just have people, they don't have a common aim, they're just stumbling around and whatever.
Right.
How do you get them to have this heartfelt, creative conversation that I call choice creating?
Right.
That I think the consent process does.
Yeah.
But when you do the consent process, I'm thinking that it really kind of assumes an organization that you're walking into that has a common aim, that has a structure, that has a boss that kind of sets things up. And given that, then we can generate...
Then there's a real creativity that comes out of it. It's a little bit different conversation than if you're simply people who happen to be next to each other and have a conflict with each other.
Yes,
yeah.
Or conflict or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really an important difference between trying to run a democracy and being a sociocracy where we're building a structure. And so why even bother might be a question. Why bother to try to bring this consent process, this consent rewiring to a town? And
So you're saying it is the consent process.
I was trying not to be repetitious, but it's the circle structure rewiring maybe would be a better way to say it. But if you look at the way towns are running right now, it just seems like there's so many opportunities for improvement because things are not aligned well. And a real simple example is the police department. It's in the best interest of the police department to have criminals, because if they had no criminals, they'd have no city budget. And it makes no sense that if the police do a good job, the people who profit is the insurance company. You know, maybe the police should be selling insurance, and if somebody breaks into your house, then they pay you.
That's a beautiful
and so we have a situation where it seems like there's an opportunity to harmonize or tune up the town, or that with a more with a forum where everybody's voice could really be heard and be encouraged, that there might be a much more joyful way of living. Over in India, they've been organizing neighborhoods. They've got 100,000 people organized using sociocracy to have the neighborhoods support each other. This is a very poor area. They provide economic support, they provide cultural support, and they're building it from the bottom up, and they've built a really interesting system. I don't know enough about it to really cite that as an example of what I'm shooting for, because the communication is really difficult with them.
Yeah.
But there's my sense is that there's something there if we poke at this idea that we can be kind of autonomous from each other and just sort of bumping into each other on the sidewalk as the way we want the town to be, that there may be something more, and it's very much an experiment.
I'd love to know more about that example, especially.
Yeah, if you look it up on the web, it's ncnworld.org, I believe.
Okay.
And you'll see it's in the Tamil region in southern India.
It'd be cool to see.
Yeah.
But you gave the illustration of the need for rearranging, restructuring how we do the police department, for instance.
Yeah,
or in this
the
town,
medical system.
Or in our county, for instance, might not have the facts exactly right, but I think someone told me that 60% of our county's budget is basically tied up in law and justice.
Oh, really? Wow.
So, I mean, and I think that if we were to have a circle meeting, as you described, we would all go, no, that's kind of not the way we want to run things.
Right. Maybe there's a different way of doing it. Yeah.
And at the same time, of course, we're laying off teachers, and it's like but the point is that it isn't that there's lots. We all know there's lots of ripe opportunity. The problem is there's no we the people to take charge to make the changes that are needed. And I'm interested in how sociocracy, or what we call dynamic governance, could become that we the people. I have a strategy for how to become that we the people, but I am imagining from the title of your book and from the class that you see something too, some possibility of how that could become a we the people that could do that restructuring.
Right. Right now, it's not easy for people to have their voices heard. In the physical neighborhood, you may not talk to your neighbor more than once or twice a year. You may have a neighborhood of people that you're emotionally connected to, but you don't do any governing that way exactly. And so what if we started to organize at the neighborhood level so that, there was like economic activity based in the neighborhood going on, and cultural activity, and this was coordinated on a citywide basis so that if people had needs for daycare, or they had needs for a nearby doctor or whatever, and they weren't there, that could be coordinated.
So that would be like a coordinating of individual needs. To me, that's a distinct thing from we the people, where we together restructure our system. It seems to me that's really, really important.
Right, and the restructuring needs to come out of a circle structure that can look at it. If I go into a corporation, which I have, and there's a sense of needing restructuring, we put in the circle structure first, and then that restructuring is handled with this circle structure, and there may be radical changes.
So it seems like you could do it within like the government itself.
Yeah,
really well.
Within the government you can, but there's no organization, say, of the cultural side of the city. The churches are separate from the newspaper, are separate from the theater, and all these things that we actually tend to neglect a lot in our pursuit of the business side. They're not organized at all. So you may have charities looking after a poor family from 4 or 5 different locations. They're not coordinated at all. So you've got a lot of duplication of effort trying to solve a social problem. And what would happen if that could be coordinated so that there was real efficiency there? There'd be lots of energy left over to do even more.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. That how do we get that coordination to happen, and how do we get the civic engagement to happen? And my sense of when I think of a we the people, to me that implies an actor, kind of one voice, one new entity in society that kind of rises to the level of taking charge of the system. In other words, we the people do ordain and establish this Constitution. We gather, we have a conversation, we gather, all of us, and we set up the system. It seems to me that's the that's the missing link right there.
We actually have lots of experience with that earlier in our country's history. A farming community, if somebody needed to raise a barn, everybody gets together and raises that barn, and then the next person does. And there was a real system of cooperation. And what's happened is two things: the Civil War, and then the tremendous onslaught of technology, which has changed the way we communicate with each other in countless ways. When the country was founded, 90% of the people were farmers. Now maybe 1 or 2% are farmers. It's a totally different structure. And the impact, the shock of the Civil War meant that traditions we had, like electing our officers in the Army. Abraham Lincoln was an elected officer for the Black Hawk War, the National Guard. We don't elect officers anymore. Those traditions, in the shock of the Civil War and all the tremendous technological development that happened afterwards, caused us to lose the feeling that we have a voice in who our leaders are. We're enfranchised in whatever we're doing, and we haven't recovered that. But it's the technology, the internet, and that kind of thing, and the fragmentation of our lives that's happening from the automobiles being everywhere is, I think, pushing a lot of people to say, how do we reconstruct that farming community, that village that we used to have, the kind of the semi-tribal feeling we used to have, where we were meeting each other on Saturday morning at the corner store and having coffee and really solving the political problems there on a person-to-person basis.
Yeah, and so we need to do that somehow.
How do we reconstruct the value of that?
So, I'm getting flagged.
Uh-oh.
Somehow we got to the end of this period. Surprise, surprise. But, John, I guess you and I are going to have to continue our talk.
I'm guaranteed I'll be back here to keep talking. I really want to dig into this.
So I want to thank John Buck, who's here from Silver Spring, Maryland, and his book is We the People, Consenting to a Deeper Democracy. And thank you again, John.
Thank you.